Okay.
It
It
is
is
as of
now.
right now.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I'll get us started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today in this very important conversation. A special thank you to Commissioner Mueller, who's joining us at this community town hall. My name is Joshua Crossan. I am the executive director of Ed Allies. Ed Allies, we're an education advocacy group dedicated to making sure that each and every kid in the state of Minnesota has an excellent education. And it's important that we have community and policymakers joining together to determine and create an education system that works for everybody. So it's a very heartfelt thank you to everyone on this call, everyone listening today, and the commissioner in the Department of Education and her team in making this happen. Today, we will hear a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. We'll hear from parents and students, and then we'll also hear from the commissioner on ideas on moving us forward and making sure that our students have the resources they need to ensure that they have a great education. After we hear from parents and the commissioner, then we'll open it up for some question and answer, and then move to audience questions. So if you have a question in mind or starting to kind of marinate on one, be sure to hold those to the end and we can make sure that we get those questions answered at the very end. We'll be sure to monitor the chat here today on Zoom and through Facebook. So make sure that you ask the questions through whatever medium possible. So first things first, what is the ARP or the American Recovery Plan? And then I think, Andrew, you'll be setting us up. Oh, there it is. All right, so the American Recovery Plan, American Rescue Plan, apologies. So the American Rescue Plan was a call from President Biden at the start of his presidential term to make sure that we are changing the course of the pandemic and focusing on real economic recovery and racial justice. And we can't have economic recovery and racial justice without also focusing on our education system. So I think next slide here. So the ARP basics, in March 11th, 2021, a $1.9 trillion relief package was signed into law. And that was the federal government, so that's $1.9 trillion federally, with $170 billion focused on education. That includes pre-K to college. So pre-K students, early learning, all the way to college and career. There's a breakdown on $122.8 billion for K-12, $39.5 billion for higher ed, and $2.75 billion for independent schools. And this is, again, nationally. We can go to the next slide. So in Minnesota specifically, we received about $1.3 billion for K-12 schools. There was a lot of flexible funding on where this money can go. Some of the money is going to academic supports, emotional, social supports, mental health needs, et cetera, that were exacerbated by the pandemic. And 90% of that funding will go directly to schools and districts, and that'll go to schools and districts based on the Title I formula, or a concentration of low-income kids that attend those schools. There are some different policies in place on how that money can be spent and when the money can be spent, but we can actually go to the next slide here. And while 90% was going directly to the schools and districts, 10% was going to the state for investments. And that's kind of why we're here today, is to really understand and peel back the onion on where the state is hoping to invest the about $132 million in rescue funds for Minnesota students. I think we can go to the next slide. So why we're here today, right? $132 million, it sounds like a lot of money because it is a lot of money. This is a historic moment to invest in our future and to really think about the ways that we can catch kids up and address needs that have been long forgotten or slipped through the cracks. So this is an opportunity that we can't miss. And which is why it's so important that the community's, again, here together with the commissioner and other policymakers. So I think with that, I would again like to welcome Commissioner Mueller to this town hall, and I will leave it to you, Commissioner Mueller, to provide an overview and opening remarks for the town hall.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. And thank you everybody for having me here today. As Josh said, my name is Heather Mueller, and I am the Commissioner of Education. And for those of you who might need a visual accommodation, I identify as a female. I have blonde hair and blue eyes. I am wearing a blue shirt with white polka dots. And so I will also do my very best to say my name when I'm asked a question so that you also know that I am the person speaking. Again, my name is Heather Mueller, and I am the Commissioner of Education. And I really also want to say thank you to this group for giving us the opportunity to come together in community and to really ask thoughtful and purposeful questions and to get your feedback, and for us to be able to respond to the questions that you do have. Over the last year, we have many Minnesotans and organizations who have been able to partner with us, and we've been able to partner alongside to really ensure that throughout this historic time that we are striving to meet the needs of students, and that we are eliminating barriers where barriers exist, and doing the work that we need to do on behalf of our students, families, and communities in looking at places where we have gaps in access and in opportunity, and ensuring that those barriers continue to be eliminated.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. And now at this time, I would open it up for Ruth Davis and daughter Rachel to kind of ground us in this conversation in why we're here today, and thinking a little bit about the questions going forward and the Department of Education's presentation on specifically our students, specifically thinking about our students of color, low-income learners, and kids with disabilities. So Ruth and Rachel, I will have you take it away.
Good evening. My name is Ruth Davis, and I'm actively involved in the Diversity Equity Committee for the Mounds View School District. Minnesota Department of Education will receive a large sum of money that will benefit the Minnesota school districts, which is so amazing. BIPOC parents like myself and students want to be allowed to play a role in helping to decide how the money is spent. The real question, how is this supposed to happen? I know for certain this survey is not a real opportunity for engagement, for feedback on how to spend the $130 million. We should be at the table with Minnesota Department of Education, helping to make the important decisions, sharing our perspectives, visions, and having the necessary deep community conversations. It will behoove Minnesota Department of Education to not ignore us, because without our existence and the existence of our children, they wouldn't have this money. I have innovative ideas along with other parents and our students. Please take the time out and listen to us. Allow our voices to be raised. Thank you. And my daughter should be coming up to speed.
Thank you, Ruth.
She's having some technical difficulties, so I have her on here.
Okay, make it work. Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Hi, I'm Rachel Davis. I am 13 years old and I attend Highview Middle School and Mounds View School District. I'm in the 8th grade when my mother told me that MDE will be receiving $130 million to making mine and other students' education better. I thought of many things that we need the money for. I would love if some of the money went to technology, because in my school, over 100 plus Chromebooks were damaged throughout the school year, which means that the school district will have to find funds to fix and or replace these Chromebooks. I would love to see some of the money go into getting new textbooks, because from what I've seen, some of them are outdated. And I would love to see more diverse textbooks and a more cultural food, so we can learn about nutrition from other cultures. I'm glad MDE has decided to extend their community engagement. but I hope there will be an opportunity to give students input, especially BIPOC students, so how the money is spent is not decided without us. Decisions can no longer be made for us without us. It would be very disappointing if MDE didn't even think to include the voices of students in an authentic way. We have ideas, we know what we need, and a vision to make our education better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth and Rachel, for your comments. I think, Rachel, we're here for you, right? This conversation and all of this attention is specifically for you. And like you said, we can't do this without you at the table. So thank you so much for presenting today. So Commissioner, let's jump in here. So you heard from Ruth and Rachel that some of the leading priorities are to make sure there's authentic community engagement, that communities that have been long forgotten or neglected are part of the decision-making process. You heard from Rachel that technology is a priority, that culturally affirming curriculum, textbooks, standards should be a priority as well. How is MDE thinking about this opportunity? And what is your vision going forward on leveraging ARP funding, aligned to kind of what we heard today with Ruth and Rachel?
Well, I think that a couple of things that are really important. First, I'd like to thank Ruth and Rachel both for coming on and sharing your perspectives and giving feedback. Over the last 16 months, we've really had the opportunity to engage with Minnesotans countless times, right? As we've partnered to support our students, we've partnered with students and for our students, with our families and for our families, and with our school staff and for our school staff. And throughout the pandemic, especially in those very early days, a couple of things that we were able to really do is, one, we were able to build an advisory group that was started off as the Distance Learning Advisory Group, which were organizations across the state that included also the voices of families and students in making sure that as we were transitioning and moving into a distance learning model, that we were being thoughtful about the approaches that we needed to take in identifying real areas of need. I think that one of the places that we identified early on was around technology. And so to hear you say that reinforces that, one, that was one of the pieces that we needed to be able to provide, is we had schools across the state that did not have access to technology. They didn't have access to internet. And the work that we needed to do was to not only get our hands on devices and get them into the hands of our schools and students, but also to really work to ensure that we found ways to be supportive with expanding internet access across the state and across our schools. I think that another place that we have continued to do this work is really being thoughtful about where these different kinds of buckets and funds come from. And so some of the ways that we've really thought about this is, we know that it is this historic time where we have funding available to us from the federal government that we've really never had before. And we also are in partnership with our state and with our legislature, and recognize that we continue to partner with them to really look at state priorities. And so some of the places that came from is the partnership and the work that the governor and lieutenant governor did in developing a round table, so that groups were able to come together and voices shared what the hopes and dreams were for education across the state, which helped to develop their Due North plan. In addition, the Department of Education did a very similar model where we worked across the state with a variety of organizations, students, and families to ensure that what we had identified in our strategic plan really helped to align with what we were hearing in our community. And so in that way, the vision is really to be cohesive and not to think of recognizing that our students and families don't come in pieces, that really our work is to provide support, to eliminate barriers, and to identify places where we know that there are needs and gaps, and to help to try to fill those as much as possible, and in partnership and able to do that. I think one of the pieces we've been able to do in that process is look at really in that vision of what are we thinking and how is that going to look, is recognizing the feedback that we were able to get prior to the pandemic, the feedback that we got throughout the pandemic really helped to align with what was put forward in legislation. and looking at ensuring that what we have available to us for federal funds, thinking about what has moved forward in legislation and what were recommendations, not only in budgetary, but also in policy, and then thinking about how those align and then utilizing evidence-based practices in order to be able to do that. So things like looking at ensuring that our state academic standards are reflective of our students and our families, that they include the diverse histories and the current contexts of our community and are representative of our student and staff population, that we know that we need to ensure that those are included in our academic standards. The funding that we provide school districts, I think in that way, really help to identify the types of resources that they utilize, but what the context is behind that, the learning and the academic standards really are created by Minnesotans, with Minnesotans and for Minnesotans. And so that's part of the process, is ensuring that our students see and hear themselves in what they're being taught. And so that's part of I think what you said around the academic standards. The textbooks, again, are pieces where funding is provided, and schools really do have the opportunity to look at resources that help to recognize the diversity of our students and staff and our families, and recognize the need to expand those resources so that they are reflective and that students see themselves in what they are using in order to do their learning. And then the final piece around that is looking also at the technology components. There are specific funds that are available and set aside to help to support schools in providing access to technology, and to ensure that when we have Chromebooks that are broken, and we know that happens in a lot of instances from middle school and high school and into elementary schools, that they have the resources to be able to replenish those technology and devices.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner. There's a lot to think about there, and we're starting to get some questions in the chat. And just remind folks to keep those questions coming. We'll be sure to ask those at the end of this conversation. But for our next segment, so thank you again, Commissioner, for that overview, your vision, what you're thinking about. We're going to dig a little deeper on some of those ideas here. And we have some partners on the call who will kick us off. I don't want to monopolize the time at all. So I'll make sure to pass the mic. So we'll open it up. If you're watching from home, again, please feel free to drop those questions in now. But in the meantime, let's start with some of our partners on the call. Charlie, I have Charlie up first, and then Paula on deck.
Hi, Commissioner. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Charlie Brayman. I'm here with Teach for America Twin Cities. I'm hoping you can share a little bit about the engagement you've done so far in planning for the ARP investment and COVID recovery more generally. You've mentioned the advisory group, so perhaps shedding a little bit more lights on those groups, and really what were the top concerns you've heard from students and families coming out of that?
Well, thank you very much, Charlie, for the question. I think that a couple of pieces, like I mentioned, we started throughout the pandemic with a distance learning advisory group. And as the Safe Learning Plan was created in that first summer, it evolved into the Equitable Safe Learning Advisory Group. And that advisory group actually existed throughout the entire 2020-2021 school year. And sometimes the year has flown by. And so in that 2020-2021 school year, and to be able to come together on a regular basis to identify areas where there are concerns in community, to be able to share places where we can, I think, increase our support or shift our support, and to help to identify barriers. And so in those conversations early on, quite honestly, there was some of the pieces that were most prevalent was specifically around technology, was around nutrition, really looking at how is it that we were going to be able to provide in a distance learning model, and recognizing that we needed to also meet the needs of students who are also receiving special education services and their IEPs, ensuring that students who speak multiple languages and are learning English as maybe their second, third, fourth, or fifth language continue to have access to high quality instruction. And so those were places where we really were some of the very first pieces that were a focus. As the pandemic continued, we continued to hear those were maintained constant, but we also then began to hear more about the mental health supports and social emotional supports for our students and families, recognizing the needs that some of our students had prior to the pandemic and have had not only throughout the pandemic, but then has maybe increased. And so really coming together to talk about the mental health and social emotional learning supports of our students. And then also really continued, in addition to that, would be the academic components. Recognizing that Minnesota has an achievement gap that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so we know that we need to be able to, one, identify where our students are in their learning. And then the second is to really be thoughtful about then what are the approaches that we were going to be able to take in order to help to meet the needs academically. And so the conversations really evolved from being really granular about specific things we needed to do at that moment to meet needs that were like rising up. We had, families, if they didn't have access to food and transportation, how are we going to do that right now? To really looking at a more global perspective and thinking about how are we going to be able to serve the whole child? Really being thoughtful about meeting not only the academic, but the social, emotional, mental health, and physical well-being of our students. How are we thinking about that in general? Recognizing, again, that the achievement gap is one of the largest in Minnesota across the nation, and that it's only been exacerbated. And so the work that we need to be able to do for our students and families is something that continued to be really a focus in the way that we're thinking about our work.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Commissioner. Paula, and then Kula, you are on deck.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am so glad to spend this time with you today in my basement while I hide from my children. Commissioner Mueller, I can't imagine how many things you have on your plate, and I'm always so grateful that you always show up in this community of parents and community organizations who are just really, we're all working together and really learning together how to create a more inclusive and more culturally responsive way of providing feedback to MD and in a way that is really going to serve our students. As you say, we do have this, our achievement gap in Minnesota is something that's really sad, especially when we rank so high, when we are only talking about white students across the nation as well. So my question to you is really related to closing those opportunity gaps, addressing racial equity in our schools, and really for us to understand how is it MDE going to ensure that the strategy that you are going to be doing, working on, is going to drive meaningful change. When I hear you speak and you say things, so I was a former teacher, well, I am a former teacher, and when you're thinking about helping a kid catch up, what you said is true. We take the baseline and then we address those needs, and that takes differentiated work. It's a lot of very often needs some more resources in the classroom, technology, as everyone has mentioned so far. With that understanding, I feel that there's a lot of that already happening. And I'm really curious to know what's going to be the tipping point that's going to move the science and the theory, which is something you're very clear about, and those of us, here are, but how are we going to make that differentiated piece to ensure that it really works? Because I think we have the theory, but what we get stuck is in the rollout and the implementation. And also really thinking, if we're only measuring proficiency at the end of the year, but we're not really measuring growth within districts, I think that when we're measuring growth, we cannot hide behind the fact that the kids are behind from the beginning of the year. And so that's really what I'm really looking to hear, because I think you have a good plan. I'm curious to know, in your conversations with your team, what is going to be the tweaking piece here that is going to really make it more meaningful, and how are you going to measure that impact? And thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the question. I think that a couple of things are important to note. Like you said, in looking at how is it that we are going to know that what we are doing is going to be effective, and how we are identifying like what those strategies look like. And again, those strategies are really looking at a solid evidence and research base, and are being thoughtful about, like, based on the needs that have been identified by our students, our families, and our communities, and our staff, is what types of evidence and research based strategies can help to meet those needs. And as you said, when you look and are thinking about being able to determine whether or not a strategy is working, the first thing you need to be able to do is to progress monitor. Right, you have to be able to see not only when students are coming in, but you have to be able to do checks along the way to see where students are at in their learning. That way you can make adjustments in that. So I think that part of that is some of the work that we've identified is around data literacy. It's one thing to have a lot of information and to have a lot of data, but you need to be able to know how to use that data. And that if you, data can be used for very good things, and it can also put you in a really guide you in the wrong direction if you're not using your information appropriately. And so really looking at and being able to determine what our data looks like. We know that we have schools and staff across the state who have done a lot of work in progress monitoring and are looking at local assessments as well as nationally normed assessments to think about that progress monitoring. So I think that that's one piece that is helping to support data literacy. As you said, the MCAs are based on proficiency. They are done at the end of the year, and they are more of a systems check than really helping to get down at the individual student level. It is never meant for that. It is not a growth measure. It is really meant specifically for proficiency in the systems. And so that individual student learning data is really going to come as you're working with individual students and collecting that information. I think that another piece of that that's really important is that we talk about the achievement gap. And one of the theses I think that's going to be helping to serve as that tipping point is the way that we think about it and talk about it, quite frankly. We've talked about access as if that is the end, and that quite frankly, access is the floor. We need to move from access to participation and representation. And so if we are only looking for access, then we are only aiming for the floor. And so we've automatically put a ceiling. And so I think that our work is to really strive to not only ensure that we have access, but that we have participation and representation in a variety of places, whether you're looking at out of school time activities, we're looking at rigorous coursework, whether we're looking at not only demographically, but geographically, if we're looking specifically at being able to really ensure that what we are providing our students and what students are engaging in is reflective of our student population. And so I think that it's more, and it goes beyond simply the academic components. It is going to be, again, I think the pandemic has done a lot of things that have been very harsh and difficult. And there are some really great lessons and things that we've learned in the process. And I think one of the things that has come out of the pandemic that I think that we can use positively is the reemergence of recognizing that, again, students are more than just a singular component that is solely academics. It is recognizing that we have an entire human who is sitting in front of us, right? Or 32 or 40 humans who are sitting in front of us, that we are partnering with them and their families. And there are multiple needs that we are meeting at the same time. And so the types of supports that we are able to provide in recognizing that we need to be able to meet those every day, but knowing where our students are and their learning, and to be able to have those conversations with people who are helping to care and support them, both inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom.
Great, thank you, Paula. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kulia, you are up, and then Maren, you are on deck.
All right, so my name is Kulia Pringle. I'm the Midwest Regional Organizer for National Parent Union and also a Bright Beam activist. Commissioner, the American Rescue Plan makes a huge investment in education. How will MDE report back to the community on the impact of these funds? What metrics will Minnesota use to track whether students are getting the support they need during COVID recovery? That question is important to me, especially going back to technology. You know, the goal was to make sure that students had technology and internet access, and I was seeing on the ground that wasn't happening. So we're wondering, how does MDE plan on tracking and making sure that the community has access to that tracking and accountability for these funds?
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate the question. I think that's really a twofold answer. When we're looking at the ARP funds, the funds that are identified for school districts. So in that 90% that Josh kind of articulated at the top of our meeting tonight, really is looking at the ability to be able to use those funds and to be able to build a plan. So they, like we at the Department of Education, they need to be able to build a plan that is submitted to the U.S. Department of Education, and then the Minnesota Department of Education has access to those plans, and those plans will be submitted in October. And one of the things that they need to be able to do is to identify how it is that they are going to be monitoring their progress in the use of and what they're using their funds for, and then what the progress is in that, very similar to what we're doing. As we are thinking about that from the Department of Education's perspective, I think there are a couple of things. One is, with the components around having access to technology, really utilizing family engagement, continuing to have, we had family feedback groups, we had student feedback groups, we also have educator and community feedback groups to be able to give us information like you had suggested that may not be happening on the ground in the way that it could be and or should be. And that may not be everywhere, but it may be in pockets and places for us to be able to identify that and then to be able to offer support. So like whether that's in a digital survey or also to be able to provide, like we said, the feedback groups. If we're looking at the progress for our students around the impact specifically, one that's going to be looking at progress monitoring and being able to see again where our students were when we began kind of in this process of coming back into a full year of programming and services if your students had been out over the last year, and really recognizing that places like the Minnesota Student Survey as a place to give information on students' individual physical health, their well-being, their mental health, and really recognizing that they are going to be giving us, it's one of the gifts that they give. Like, there's a lot of gifts that kids give us, but it's one that they are willing to give very freely and are willing to share with us where they are. So I think that's going to be a really important piece of information. We've talked about the fact that our MCAs are another really important piece of information because it does give us a systemic check of what that is going to look like. Now, in addition, we are going to be building in very specific progress monitoring approaches for each of the strategies to help to be able to identify what type of progress we're making, not only in implementation, because that's something that's important, is the fidelity to implementation, but also then the impacts of that.
Great. Thank you so much, Cooley and Commissioner. We're going to skip Marn for now, just for a second, and go to Julia and then Michelle.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Commissioner. And I echo Paula by saying I know you have a lot going on, so we appreciate you being here today. So you were just touching on some of this, but I want to say, after 2 years of interrupted learning, we understand it might take time to rebuild, and it will be important for MDE to have ongoing feedback loops to hear from students and families what is going well, but more importantly, where are there still challenges? How would MDE make the space for community leaders to provide feedback on progress, challenges, and ongoing needs within Minnesota's diverse cultural communities? Mm-hmm. Would MDE be open to creating a COVID recovery community advisory board or a similar structure for ongoing feedback? Mm-hmm. You mentioned some different places that you are getting feedback, but it's really in the system. This would not be community that's in the systems, the schools and all. This will be directly for MDE to hear from the community, mm-hmm. to actually be that lever that you would hear really what's working and what's not working.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Julia, because I think, yes, absolutely. I think, like we said, we have identified, we've had a couple of versions of advisory groups that have helped to really meet our needs as we've walked through this. The Equitable Safe Learning Plan Advisory Group actually was just sunset over the last month as the school year ended, because we really know that as we move into like this, again, next phase of where we are, that we wanted to be able to look at like what we need in an advisory group. And so it may be some of the exact same group of people and it may look vastly different. The other thing is going to be a little bit different is the Department of Education we have just within the last, since April, since I had the opportunity to step into this role, we have built a community engagement division. And so we will be hiring members from within our community who are representative of our diverse community to be able to, one, help us continue to partner with families and students in our communities. And so as we are hiring and bringing people into this work, then we are going to be looking at ways that we are going to be able to engage, and an advisory board or committee might be the very best way for us to be able to do that. And we are going to be able to work in partnership to really determine what our best process is going to look like. But we're certainly open to that.
Great. And it sounds like there will be ongoing community engagement throughout the process. And what I heard from you, Commissioner, is opening up that conversation, or at least letting the community know when there are opportunities to engage during those periods. So
absolutely, and it may be that a board is a very right thing, and it may be that a board and right. I think that we need to think about the beauty of and the tyranny of or, right? And so we want to live maybe oftentimes in the beauty of and so it may be a board and a series of whatever that looks like. And so I think it just, again, opens up possibilities, because we have throughout the Department of Education, we have within each of our divisions people who are functioning and partnering with communities and engagement, but oftentimes that may feel siloed, not only within the department, but also for our communities. And so we are really striving to not only take the experts who have been doing this work in the department, but also pulling together experts who can really focus on this work solely, that this is the work. And to continue to help to find ways to be really consistent in our approaches.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Julia. Next up, we have Michelle, and then we will circle back with Maren.
Okay.
Hello, Commissioner Mueller. I just really appreciate you being here with us tonight. My name is Michelle Chang from the Coalition of Asian American Leaders. So we know that states are required to discuss their capacity for effective data collection and reporting in their ARP plans. And we know that Minnesota's data systems need improvement for user-friendly transparency, effective data disaggregation, and to track needs and outcomes from cradle to career. I'm curious if MDE will take advantage of the ARP funding to improve state data systems. And how will MDE ensure we have the infrastructure to measure what's working and what is not working for our students in the state of Minnesota?
Well, I appreciate this question, because I know that it's incredibly important for this group, and I think it's incredibly important for us in general. The ability to have, again, data, the collection of data means that we need to be able to use it appropriately. And we need to have systems and structures that allow it to be transparent. If we're going to collect data, then we need to be able to use it, and it needs to be available. And so one of the pieces that has been created is an EdFi system. And that is based on data disaggregation. As you know, the legislature several years ago created a statute and put forward a statute that does require specific data disaggregation, and therefore moved forward with the Department of Education moved forward with an EdFi structure. In order to be able to do that, while the legislature created that statute, the Department of Education, was before I was in the department, but had to move forward to find a federal grant to be able to fund the building of that type of structure and infrastructure. And then that federal funding actually runs out at the end of this fiscal year. And so we had been working with the legislature, the governor had put it in the budget, because the governor and lieutenant governor know how important data disaggregation is, not only to the Department of Education and to schools, but to community as well. And so we had put that in the budget. As you may have heard, that the budget was agreed on. And so we are incredibly grateful for that. But EdFi was not included in that. We were hopeful that it was going to be something that would receive ongoing funding, because it is in state statute. But that did not move forward. And as a result, as we had shared, and we talked, I think, over the last couple of weeks, then as a result, we will be looking at alternative ways to be able to fund the data disaggregation, and specifically the EdFi system.
I don't know, Michelle, if there's a follow-up there, but I think we'll go next with, I said Marin, and then Makisha, you'll round us out. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you so much, Commissioner Mueller. We're really grateful for you to be here this evening with us. When we've spoken before, I've mentioned that I'm the parent of a child with a disability, and my organization, the Multicultural Autism Action Network, works with multiply marginalized kids, mostly from immigrant communities that are autistic. And my question is mainly about the strategies. We've heard a lot of stories from families that have really struggled this year. So I'm wondering how MDE is going to prioritize the unique academic needs of those multiply marginalized students with disabilities, English learners, students that are experiencing homelessness or highly mobile, foster youth, those that have really faced some significant barriers to learning during the pandemic. How are they going to be prioritized, and what strategies is MDE planning on implementing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marin. I appreciate that. I think that a couple of things are important to note. Through the federal fund, there have been a series of different funding streams that have been identified to really help to specifically focus on each of the student groups that you've identified: students who receive special education services, students who are learning English again as their second, third, fourth, fifth language. We also for our migrant students, our homeless students, our highly mobile students, our foster youth, and recognizing that they do have significant barriers that have been created as a result of the pandemic. And so in this work, we have had the opportunity specifically as a department to partner with each of the divisions within the Department of Education to reach out specifically to each of these populations and partner with them on behalf of themselves and with their students to really talk about the types of strategies that they would find most effective and helpful and useful. And one of the pieces that's really come out of that is looking again at wraparound services, recognizing that oftentimes in the system, not only in education, but I think across government systems, quite frankly, that we don't make it easy on students and families. And so not only recognizing the support for individual students, but recognizing the support for families in general is one of the pieces that we've heard come out of some of those focus groups where we've had the opportunity to partner. I think in addition, it's recognizing that we will have different strategies that help to focus on each of these student groups and populations. We know that there are specific strategies that work better for some student groups than they do for other student groups, and we need to be able to differentiate between them. And so those are pieces that, again, in utilizing evidence and research-based practices, are really aligning the identified need with the appropriate intervention or strategy, for lack of a better term.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Marin. And to round us out, Makisha.
Commissioner, thank you so much for being here today. In my engagement, both as a parent with 3 students in our pre-K to 12 system, I've been becoming increasingly aware of just how COVID has exacerbated some of the mental health and social emotional needs of our students and the educators and leaders supporting those students. I heard you talk a little bit about that being a priority that also came through some of the initial community listening sessions you've had. As I've been a member of the stakeholder engagement for Minneapolis Public Schools, and just in my role at World's Best Workforce, I've been becoming increasingly aware of the fact that from a counselor to student ratio, Minnesota is often one of the worst states with over 1 counselor every 600 students. Mm-hmm. How do you think MDE will be working to address this issue around mental health and the social emotional supports that are needed for our students to learn, lead, and thrive in our education system?
Yeah, I appreciate you recognizing that. I think that there are a couple of pieces that, one, we started with immediately, and that was looking at, as we had some of the summer funding that was available that the governor had put toward summer programming. One of those pieces was ensuring that we had mental health supports throughout the summer. And that is recognizing whether that's counselors or social workers, school psychologists, school nurses, or chemical dependency counselors, but not only for our students, but also for our staff. and knowing that we have really purposeful, we're going to need to have really purposeful approaches and really thoughtful approaches to being able to teach and support social emotional learning and mental health in our schools as much as we are teaching academics. And so we have a counselor to student ratio that is, as you pointed out, one of the highest in the nation. And we have identified and did identify expansion of student support personnel as part of the budget. That did not move forward this year, but that doesn't mean that our commitment to supporting those types of endeavors has to change. We also know that we have, quite frankly, a pipeline problem. We also have people who are not necessarily choosing to go into school counselors or social workers or psychologists or school nurses or chemical dependency. And oftentimes when we do, they are not a diverse workforce. And so we are working in partnering in ways to be able to, one, expand the workforce, and two, to diversify that workforce. And then we also need to make sure that we have the pieces in place. And so that's going to mean that in lieu of being able to change that ratio, some of these dollars could be utilized to have hiring of student support personnel, because we do know how incredibly important that is. And we also have the resources available to be able to partner with school districts who may not be able to fund or find a student support personnel person to help to support that. And so the types of resources that we'd be able to support. And also the final part of that is, again, looking at wraparound services. We know, and I think that this is another thing that, again, has come out of the pandemic that has been very good, is that recognizing that the school is one place, but our community partners are incredible partners, and that our ability to engage and rely on each other continues to be incredibly important. And so we have amazing resources in our communities who can partner. So if we don't have access to counselors or social workers or school psychologists or nurses or chemical dependency, I feel like I need to say them all every time because they are so important, all groups, but is recognizing that we do have people in our community who can offer that type of support and who can offer those types of services, and our ability to partner continue to be really important. And so I think it gives us the opportunity to be thoughtful and creative when we have a pipeline problem, when we have a diverse pipeline problem, and then when we don't actually have the funding to be able to do maybe what we needed to do, then this gives us the opportunity to really partner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank
Right,
you.
thank you. Thank you, partners. Thank you all. Now is the time that we'll go to questions from the chat. Things we didn't say 20 years ago. But,
right.
But I think the first question that I have here is a kind of logistical question. We talked a little bit about technology funding, but we had a question here on how can and cannot the funds be used? Can they be used to offset expenses due to COVID or reimburse schools? Can you, Commissioner, explain a little bit about kind of the logistics around how the funds can be used?
Sure. So in this, so as Josh kind of indicated at the very beginning, when you have the 100% of the pot, 90% of those dollars went directly to schools based on a formula articulated by the federal government utilizing Title I. And it's not just looking at socioeconomic status. There's a variety of pieces that go into that. And so that 90% moved out the door. Then there is the 10% that is left over. And actually of that 10%, 9.5%, which is roughly $125 million, is identified for use to help to support like the impacts of COVID. And the way that the U.S. Department of Education and the federal statutes kind of articulate is that 5% of the 9.5% needs to be used to focus on addressing learning loss. 1% of the 9.5% needs to help to support after school programming. 1% of the 9.5% needs to be able to support summer enrichment, and the 1% of the 9.5% can be utilized for other state activities. And so that really serves essentially as a breakdown in looking at being able to have and really the plan that we're addressing is really focused on that larger bucket of addressing learning loss. And so that is the logistical pieces. And so of that, that's kind of how you utilize that. So it's of that 9.5% that we would need to be able to identify, that 5% of that is going toward addressing learning loss, and then follow those, the structure that's been identified by the U.S. Department of Education.
Great. So there are some kind of broader guidelines that MDE has to follow, but has more flexibility within that. And I think that aligns with the yet another technical question of how much flexibility does MDE have with this money? Does the legislature need to be involved in this process, or is it really MDE and in collaboration with the community?
Yeah, so actually it started with the legislature. So when funds come through the federal government, they actually go into what's called the LAC, the Legislative Advisory Committee or Council. In that, then you have representatives from both the House and the Senate who have the opportunity to review like how the federal funds are supposed to be used and what that's going to look like. Not only the funds from the Department of Education, but like the funds that came into the governor, all who have to move through the LAC, like that's just the process. And then they are in the LAC for a set period of time where they have the House and the Senate has the opportunity, representatives from the House and the Senate have the opportunity to review like how those funds are supposed to be used and what that's going to look like. They can release the funds. They could ask a series of questions. If they release the funds, then the funds are released. If they ask a series of questions, then the funding stays in what's called the LAC until either the LAC releases them or until the legislative session ends. And so these funds were actually made available in April. It came out in March. It became available. They kind of moved them out to the states in April. It went to the LAC in the first 21 days. 90% were released. There were questions on thoughts about how we might be using the 9.5%. There was questions across the nation about whether or not the funds could be used by the legislature, or if they could, like how they could be used and what that would look like. So there was a series of time where legislatures and states were looking from across the nation and figuring out how to use these funds best, or could the legislature use them? And the answer in that instance was no. And so the funds were released at the end actually of the legislative session. And so that is also a piece where I think one of the pieces that came up earlier was like a short and tight turnaround. I just want to be really clear that the funds, because they were released at the end of the legislative session, was actually very, very close to when the plans were due to the U.S. Department of Education. The plans were actually due to the U.S. Department of Education on June 7th. And I did write a letter to Secretary Cardona, who was the Education Secretary, the U.S. Education Secretary, and just said that's a really tight turnaround. It was really hard to do engagement with our communities and in a really deep and meaningful way when we have a week to turn this around. It's too fast. And so we were able to get an extension. It's until June 30th. And so that's why we are really deeply grateful that we have the opportunity to engage. And Ruth, I understood your frustration, and understanding around the survey, but that was when we still believed we had 1 week to get from the time the funds were released until the time that our plan was due. We thought we had 1 week. And so we needed to try to get information as quickly as possible. And we found out actually the day before we were getting ready to try to do some submissions and writing other plans that we were actually able to have until June 30th. And so again, we appreciate the opportunity to be doing this. And really, our team has been doing an amazing job in the midst of the budget, trying to get as much feedback from communities as possible, because we know that it's incredibly important. But so the legislature, I'm going back, I kind of got sidetracked there, but the legislature does not now. Once it's out of the LAC, then the intent has been based on the U.S. Department of Education is going to be based at MDE. And so we will be working with partners and communities to make sure that, again, we know that it has to be used for learning loss. It has to be used for after school. It has to be used for summer programming, and then it can be used for other state priorities.
Great, thank you. We have a handful of questions kind of around the same topic of investments in how we deliver learning or how we transform the way that we educate students. Is there, right now, does MDE prioritize, or is MDE prioritizing new models of delivering learning, whether that's through service learning, through science of reading, through enrichment activities, STEM programming? Where is the department thinking in terms of changing the way that we're delivering learning to students?
Well, I think that one of the things we're talking about is one, and I think Paula, you talked about this a little bit. There's the science of teaching, and then there's the art of teaching, right? And so the science of teaching is what all students need to know and be able to do. It really is a clear articulation of, as a result of being in a pre-K through 12 setting in the state of Minnesota, that your high school diploma means that this is the knowledge, these are the knowledge and the skills that you have. And so that is the what. And so the questions that you've asked around, making sure that the diverse student population, that the stories and histories and the current contexts of our diverse populations are reflected in the knowledge and the skills and the what is something that we are working on immediately and in the now, right? Those are incredibly important components that we are building into that science piece. When we're talking about that other piece, I think that you're alluding to, Josh, is really the art of what we do and the delivery and the models around what that looks like. And so what that means is that we have school districts across the state that are incredibly innovative. One of the things, like, again, the pandemic has done is it forced distance learning in ways that, like, we didn't think probably was possible in the span of 8 days, right? To shift an entire education system on its side and immediately shift. Granted, there were struggles, but what we learned is that we actually do have an adaptable and flexible system in places where we thought maybe we didn't. And so I think that helped to spawn and build, I think, the ideas around innovation. And so in the art of ways to be able to meet the needs of students, to ensure that their what is being mastered, we are looking at a variety of ways to really help to continue to engage students, to find alternative ways to provide that instruction and recognize that can come in a variety of formats. And so I think that we are, as a department, looking at innovative ways to be able to help to support the reimagining and revisiting of the way that we provide instruction and what schools look like. And if there is a time to make those shifts, it is now, right? And again, if we recognize that instead of access being a place that's considered a ceiling and access is actually the floor, then what we are striving for is participation and representation in our art as well.
Okay, so am I hearing correctly then that I hear that the time is now? Does that mean that investments or as you develop your plan, you're thinking about having the ARP investments going towards these kind of transformational ways of delivering learning?
I think it's not only necessarily the transformational ways of learning, because sometimes that's best, sometimes in some ways just best determined at, like, in the district. If we know that every district looks different, those communities that are served are different. I think one of the ways we're thinking about that is, one is not only the way of learning, but two is looking at the system in general. It gives us the opportunity to actually find ways to change the system and the barriers that exist within the system.
Okay, great, thank you. We have another question here in the chat around priorities around after school and summer programming. Can you describe a little bit? I've heard in the news that Governor Walz is thinking of, and the Department of Education are thinking of prioritizing after school spending and summer learning. What does that look like, especially now, given that summer has already started?
Right. So when we're looking at this, the summer learning funds that the governor kind of released early in the summer, I think that looked in a variety of things. One, again, knowing that we are in a very different position. And so I think one of the things we're seeing is that oftentimes summer programming is very school building centric. And so it really thinks that it gives us a way to think about summer programming, so it's not school building centric. Hands-on learning opportunities, being able to do field trips that apply your knowledge and give students the opportunity to have access and participate in programs and services that they may not have had the opportunity to do before, to really recognize the types of services that are provided across the state of Minnesota and ways for us to be able to really provide those types of hands-on learning. It looks at ways to also think about, so things like neighborhood programs. We know that we have sometimes in the summer, we have students who are either our older students, our middle school students, upper elementary and high school students who cannot participate in summer enrichment activities because it is their responsibility to be supportive of their siblings throughout the summer. And so being able to move it from a school building and into a neighborhood or a park where we're able to provide care for siblings, so that student, if they want to have enrichment, can have enrichment in their neighborhood programs, the ability to offer food and to really move the mental health and academic services into neighborhoods and communities versus having students coming into the building. And so really thinking about, again, serving students and families where they are and giving us the opportunity to apply that knowledge differently. Looking also at things like preschool. We know that preschool, we had a number of students who weren't able to participate in either in preschool programming. And so offering free preschool to 4 and 5-year-olds as another way to be able to really look at thinking about systems and structures and recognizing ways that we can look at summer enrichment differently.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question here on literacy. So I'll just read the question as it's stated. So literacy is an essential academic foundation. Unfortunately, many students are not on track, and this has only been exacerbated over the past year. How will MDE ensure that pre-K through 3 students have the support they need to develop this foundation, despite significant disruptions during COVID?
Well, I think that a couple of things are important. Is one, we have been working as a Department of Education in building literacy expertise and looking at a statewide literacy model that is really based on evidence and research to be able to have the basic tenets of literacy. It's also recognizing, again, access and building the ability for students to participate in pre-K programming. The ability that's just come into the budgets, one of the pieces that was really important was the maintaining of 2,000 voluntary pre-K seats for students. And so because of that, that's 2,000 more students who have access. And we recognize the important role that pre-K helps to provide. And then it also means that going back to, I think, some of the questions that Paolo, you asked, is really looking at how are we going to know where students are and what is the baseline information that we have? And then also, how are we going to provide opportunities to practice for students to practice not only in school, but how do we provide opportunities for students to practice outside of school? And to not make it necessarily reliant on a family member, but to really give students the opportunity to be able to really build their learning and literacy skills. And so it really is looking at a broad approach and then providing data and resources to be able to help to support that.
Great, thank you. Going back to, you mentioned district plans, and those district plans coming to the Department of Education. We have a question here of how are those district plans going to be conveyed to the public? And will they include budgets for the public to also review?
I know that there is an entire document that kind of helps to articulate what needs to be posted, what doesn't need to be posted, and where that needs to, and how we need to be able to do that. They are required to post those plans, just as we are required to post our plan. I have to think about the budget piece, whether or not that needs to be included, but I know that the plan does need to be posted.
So the districts are required to post their plans. Is it on their district website? It's not. Will it not be posted on the Department of Education's website?
No, it'll be housed directly on each individual school district's website. They also in part of this, their plan is due in October, so they have a little bit more time, and they also are given the opportunity to do robust engagement as well.
Okay, great. And kind of staying in line with local districts. how is MDE thinking about the equitable distribution of resources based on our urban and rural schools? I know you're thinking the Title I dollars, but is there a specific focus on the urban and rural divide?
Yeah, I think what we're really looking at is historically underserved students, and there's a clear definition of what historically underserved students look right in a definition is something that we already utilize, and so we are looking at that as a basis for a formula to be able to allocate funds.
Okay, great. Question on timeline. So. What is MDE thinking about in terms of spending, or I should say, what are the big milestones from now until when MDE has to deliver their plan to the federal government? What's on their horizon, and what should we be looking out for in each of those milestones?
Sure. Well, I think that a couple of things. The plan is due on June 30th. And so the public comment period ended yesterday. And so we will be going through and analyzing that information and kind of pulling together the common themes to be able to help to identify. We have been doing robust engagement. And so our team who has been able to do that work is again pulling themes together, not only from each of those individual engagements, but really helping to combine those themes in general. And then helping to kind of give us that information. And then what we will be doing is sharing on and meeting with groups to give follow-up and feedback to thank you very much for the feedback. These are the themes that we heard, and as a result, this is the plan that we are going to be putting forward, so that it's not a surprise to people with whom we've had the opportunity to engage. And then we will be making sure that plan is sent off on June 30th. And so it's a very short timeline between now and then. And so quite honestly, the other thing that was a really important piece is to have had the state budget for education specifically agreed upon, because that also gives us a sense of what is included in the budget and what is not included in the budget, and ways for us to be able to think about that differently.
Great. All right, and on that, what is the or I should say, we're coming up to an end. You had the public comment end yesterday. From when the federal government provided you an extended runway, can you describe a little bit about how the Department of Education used that time to engage robustly with the community?
Sure. So once we were able to know that beyond the very short, 1 to 2 week timeframe, we then reached out to community groups to talk about one. We had asked for feedback in writing initially when we knew that we had a very short timeline. So we asked for feedback in writing from organizations who help to partner with communities, and to the second piece was to provide a survey. And so as a result, then went back and started to connect with organizations to say, right, are you interested in being able to host any outreach? We also were making sure that we are doing outreach with communities whose first language was not English, making sure that we had translation services. So that way we were making sure that we were getting authentic communication, and that voices were heard. We also had the opportunity to do a number of sessions very similar to this, where we had a team who was able to get information and themes. Again, as we talked about in Marin's example, where we had feedback groups that were specifically focused on specific student groups. We also, whether that would be students who are currently houseless, whether we have students who are migrant students, students who are part of an English learner, students who are receiving special education services, really focused specifically on very specific student groups, and then also partnered with organizations who wanted to be able to partner with us in those ways.
Okay. I have just two more questions. It looks like one was a very specific question on service learning.
Okay.
Has the Department of Education, have you specifically looked at proposals around providing service learning and experiential learning for students? And is there any talk or conversation around the investments going towards specifically service learning?
Specifically service learning, no.
Experiential learning.
Yep. There have been conversations around pieces for things that are more competency-based, which are inclusive of service learning and inclusive of experiential learning. We also know that, again, really being thoughtful about the art of what that looks like. And so helping to support schools and districts who are interested in moving in that direction is something that we're definitely having conversations with individual school districts, as well as thinking about how it is we can continue to provide those types of opportunities and supports across the state.
Okay, great. And the final question I have before we round out this conversation is a theme that's coming up over and over and over again is how can the community be involved throughout this process from now and going forward? Question, and I'll just read these verbatim. Questions on how can I participate in the next iteration of those roundtable conversations? How can I be in those roundtable groups? How can I be involved with the governor's next Due North plan? Will the public be able to view the themes or outcomes coming out of the community feedback survey and provide that community feedback directly to the Department of Education? Will these groups here, will people here today in today's call be informed of next steps to engage in the community process authentically and robustly? So again, a lot of questions around the same theme of when will we have an opportunity as the public to be involved in the decision-making process?
Well, I think that there's a couple of places. First, I think the roundtables were one avenue of engagement in 2020. They were not the only avenue of engagement. And so as we move forward, as we said, as an agency, we are building and a public engagement and community engagement division. And so that as that continues to build will be something that we will have for our ongoing commitment is to continue to partner with our communities and hold regular engagement and feedback sessions. And honestly, there will be times when we are coming to share information and to get feedback and to ask questions, and then other times to be able to help to share information. And so I think that our commitment going forward is to really, that's why we've built this in the first place, is because we believe community engagement is incredibly important, and the voices of the communities with whom we serve need to continue to be at the table. And so the building of that is the first step, and then the plan of once we have the people in place to be able to do this work, then the plan of really looking at a robust division that can really help to engage. Again, we have experts in our agency who do this work, and they do this work within individual divisions. And I think that part of having a division that's dedicated solely to this work is to really help to align it not only across the agency, but to ensure that we're continuing to do this on a regular basis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Commissioner. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you. That was a high note to end on. I definitely appreciate you, Commissioner Mueller. I appreciate those today who had an opportunity to listen in, to ask questions, to be engaged throughout this process. For those of you watching, for those of you who shared, thank you so much for participating. We heard a lot of questions today highlighting the needs of students and families and the barriers that they're facing due to this, the soft way of putting it, unprecedented times. I also often like to say the hellscape of COVID. The light's at the end of the tunnel, and we're excited that we're finally at the recovery portion of it. I'll leave it to you, Commissioner, if you have any closing words, final words to summarize this event, this conversation, or next steps for us.
Well, one, I just want to, just thank you all again for giving us the opportunity to partner and to really hear, both from Ruth and Rachel. Thank you very much for taking the time and really providing your feedback. And for all of you who are representing organizations, right, your continued partnership continues to be really important. I think that one of the things that we know as a department is that there are times when it is our job to lead. There is a time when it is our job to partner, and then there are times when it's our job to follow. And so I think that what we are are settling in is how is it that we are able to do each of those things and recognizing when it's our turn to do which. But we are always certain that what our job is to do is to look at our system, not only as the Department of Education, but as an education system in general, and to identify where we have barriers and to eliminate them, to provide access and recognize that every single student, every single day matters, and that our job is to make sure they know it.
Awesome. Thank you again, Commissioner. And then thank you all again. As we said in the beginning of this event, we know that student needs have never been greater than right now. We also know that we have a unique opportunity, dare I say, challenge to spend money that was granted to us by the federal government through the ARP funds. So I'm sure many of you have thoughts and reactions to this conversation today. So please take a moment to share some of those thoughts. We've shared a link. For those of you who can't see the link, it is a bit.ly/ARP town hall, bit.ly /ARP town hall. And please share your feedback on this event. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again. And we'll leave it there. Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.